Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Steve Brubaker. I am a consultant with the Small Businesses of Fantasy Sports. This is a newly formed trade association for the businesses, the small businesses that are involved in the fantasy sports industry. With me today are fantasy sports contest operators, Alex Kaganovsky, and I can't even see you, Chris Lambert. I couldn't see Chris, I'm sorry. And Matt Schauf and Lenny Papano are content providers. And they'll both, Mr. Kaganovsky and Mr. Schauf will speak for a few minutes about why they're here today and what they do. But before we begin with that, I just wanted to make a few comments about how thankful we are about the opportunities we had yesterday to speak with Senator Bonasik's staffer, Andrew Winchell, and with Assemblyman Pretlow and his staff about some of the changes that we need to see in New York so the small businesses can flourish here as they have for a long time. We were encouraged by those meetings. We think we can come back and modify the language in a way that allows everybody to participate in New York. And with no further ado, Alex.
Thank you, Steve. Good afternoon. My name is Alex Kaganovsky, and I am the co-founder and the managing partner for Fantasy Football Players Championship, a company based in New York City. We're here today to announce the formation of a coalition dedicated to represent the interest of small fantasy sports businesses, serving tens of thousands of customers in New York State and thousands more nationwide. We're also here to voice our concerns with the current draft of Senate Bill 6793. Yesterday, we met with Senator Bonasik's staff and Assemblyman Pretlow. We are very grateful to them for hearing our concerns. The currently proposed legislation includes an entry fee, which is beyond the reach of small businesses that operate in the fantasy sports industry. This type of prohibitive fee allows the Goliaths of our industry, DraftKings and FanDuel, to operate while closing the market to companies like mine and others in our organization. We're looking forward to continued meetings with members of the legislature to address and correct these issues. New York is the battleground for the small businesses of fantasy sports, and it is crucial that we pass smart legislation which levels the playing field for all in the fantasy industry. How ironic would it be if legislation designed to regulate DraftKings and FanDuel would actually do so by putting the rest of the small industry, small businesses, out of business? That cannot and should not happen. Unfortunately, we've already witnessed this in two other states just recently. Indiana and Virginia. Newly passed laws there will force all small business game operators out of those two states, all except for FanDuel and DraftKings. So why exactly does this legislation, as written, put us out of business? And the answer is pretty simple. We simply cannot afford the $500,000 fees and the 15% tax on revenue. The truth is, this industry is much broader than just FanDuel and DraftKings. Small businesses have been the lifeblood of the fantasy industry for decades. Many of them in our organization have been operating long before FanDuel and DraftKings became household names, long before all this trouble started. In fact, smaller daily fantasy sports and seasoned fantasy sports businesses have been operating in New York for many years, with thousands of New York customers that have enjoyed our products and paid taxes on their league winnings in New York. Many jobs are also at stake here, provided by our small businesses. And to that end, we need smart legislation that will simply allow us to continue to operate, to innovate, to thrive in the state. A $500,000 licensing fee and 50% tax on revenue will simply create a duopoly and kill off the rest of us. Our organization, the Small Businesses of Fantasy Sports, will propose changes to the legislation that take into account the individual size of business and the number of customers that a business has when considering licensing fees and taxes on revenue. We look forward to working with legislators who understand the nuances of our industry, and we look forward to the ability to continue operating in the great state of New York. Thank you.
Matt?
Hello, I'm Matt Schauf, and I'm a senior writer for DraftSharks.com, which is based in Rochester, New York. I'd also like to thank Senator Bonasik's staff and Assemblyman Pretlow for meeting with us yesterday. We look forward to continuing our conversation with both of them. My company provides analysis and advice to fantasy football players and relies heavily on a subscriber base of about 19,000 for our annual revenue. Senate Bill 6793 in its current form would not force my company to pay anything. So why am I here? At least a quarter of our readers come to us looking for content specific to contests such as those operated by the FFPC. If Alex's company and then others like his go out of business because of the exorbitant fees that DraftKings, FanDuel, and the Fantasy Sports Trade Association seem ready to make them pay, well, then there go a lot of the people willing to pay for my content. And dozens of other content providers, stat providers, and software developers just like us face the exact same challenge. So I'm here to stand with the other small businesses of the fantasy sports industry, many of whom operate and already pay taxes right here in New York, to make sure we have a voice, to try to keep my job from disappearing, and to make sure that fantasy players can continue to have more than just FanDuel and DraftKings to choose from. Thank you.
All right, if members of the news media have questions for the folks up here, go ahead and bring them.
So you only have issues with the Senate bill, but does the Assembly bill mirror the Senate bill? I'm not.
Haven't seen an Assembly bill yet.
Okay.
I guess I should be up here for that. I haven't seen an Assembly bill yet, but I think there's going to be one, and we want to be part of any moving legislation here. Really, the language itself that we've seen from Senator Bonasek is 95% perfect. All the consumer protections are fine. It's just the fee structure for the entry, and then on the back side, the 15% tax. Those we'd like to see modified to be scalable to smaller companies. I think what you might have as a problem with the perception of what fantasy sports are, because of all the advertising you see from DraftKings and FanDuel, that's the industry in a lot of people's minds. And we're just trying to educate people that there's a lot of very small businesses, but profitable businesses that are in the space and want to remain in the space.
And I just want to be clear about the issue the Virginia and Indiana legislation was. What were the problems there?
Very similar. The fees there were $50,000, which, although considerably smaller than proposed fees here, they're much smaller states, and most of the small businesses that I am familiar with have already pretty much announced that they would not be able to pay those fees. So again, it would end up being a duopoly in those states, with potentially another company like Yahoo possibly affording them. That's it.
Sure. In this one, it would be $500,000 or 5% of net revenues is what you support. I mean, what does 5% of net revenues look like?
The current proposal is 15%.
Okay.
Is what's being proposed here.
All right. So what does 15% of net revenues? What does that equate to?
Well, if you want to break down the numbers, it ends up being something like 30% of our net profit.
What's the dollar on average for members of this organization?
We don't have any revenue numbers. That's not something that the companies share with the association.
Sure.
Has the FFPC been impacted by the Attorney General's actions at all, or are you allowed to? Have you been operating in the past few months?
We have been operating since 2008 here. The Attorney General, as far as I know, was targeting FanDuel and DraftKings, but we're here to talk about the bill. Attorney General is not something we're looking at.
How many of your members do daily fantasy sports?
In my company, we provide solely season-long games and leagues.
Within the association?
Within the association, we have companies that provide solely season-long, solely small DFS providers, daily fantasy sports, and some companies who provide both. It's mostly one or the other, correct?
Can you speak to that, Chris? Do you know?
In the aggregate, is it mostly daily or mostly seasonal?
I would say it's a good mix of both. I think you have a little bit more you have a little more startup companies that that are emerging with the in the DFS space.
And do you subscribe to the Attorney General's position that this is gambling?
That's for the lawmakers to decide. I don't necessarily have an opinion on that.
And the Attorney General did specify that season long was not what he was attacking, did not call that gambling. What he would call gambling was the daily that DraftKings and FanDuel do. He even specifically said that our games are games of skill.
And as you read it, this attempt to regulate applies to both people.
Well, this is separate from what the Attorney General has done.
I understand, but the legislation. as you-
Correct.
Right, yeah.
Yes, we assume that the legislation will apply to everyone. Correct. Correct.
Mhm.
And you want net revenues as opposed to gross, right?
Yeah.
Let me answer that one if I could. My understanding of the senator's bill is there is a definition that's called gross revenue, but it's really a net revenue number because you have the money coming in from the players, less what's paid out to the players, less some comprehensive or some comps to the players. So then off of that number comes the 15%, as we understand it. Even still, with that stipulation, 15% is too high for us.
Your understanding too is that was written, that draft was written by FanDuel and DraftKings.
Well, we don't know that. We assume that because we see their boilerplate all across the country in all kinds of state capitals.
Just like that.
Similar. The certainly not. We don't see 500,000 everywhere. I think there's a 500,000 fee in Florida. Different states have different taxes on the back end. I think New Jersey just had a bill out that's 9.25%. So we're dealing with this one today because it's on the front burner, and we'll see what comes up as we go from state to state.
So just to follow up on an earlier question, have any members of the association been contacted by the Attorney General's office? And
No,
are they
none.
still operating in New
Mhm.
York currently?
As far as we know.
How many companies are New York based that are in your association?
Well, our association was put together about a week to 10 days ago. So we currently have a total of 35 small businesses. We're growing rapidly. We had to organize very fast due to the changing kind of landscape of everything here, starting with Virginia and Indiana. That's kind of what spurred all this on. So to answer your question, it's probably just maybe at least 3 or 4 that are based in New York. But there's certainly a lot more out there that will probably be that are out there and hopefully will join our organization as well.
And how many employees do you guys have?
My company, we have 3 full-time employees, including the officers, and we have several dozen part-time and seasonal employees.
Mr. Kaganovsky, where are you based?
New York City.
And Lenny, how many employees, please?
We have 5 full-timers.
And Preble and Bonacek are both, once they're both fine with revising as far as you can read them so far?
Well, we haven't gotten commitments from anyone yet, but we were very pleased with the meetings that we had with Senator Bonasik's staff and then with Assemblyman Pretlow and his 2 staffers that were at that meeting. We think they understand our predicament much better than they did before us coming here, so we're glad we made the trip. I'm relatively confident that we can get some of the changes in that we're thinking about before the end of session.
And if you were unregulated before, you're going to pay more money now than you would.
Well, if you look at what's going on across the country, there are safe harbor bills for DraftKings and FanDuel in just about every state capital. And so most of them are going to capture everybody. So if we're going to be captured, we want to have basically uniform language in all those states. So if we get the right language here that satisfies the big companies and the small companies, that should become the model that we carry throughout the rest of the nation.
I also just wanted to add that in speaking to the assemblyman and the senator office, a lot of this is new to them, and just generally, we've spoken to the lawmakers in Virginia and Indiana as well, and most of them are not aware that of the scope of the fantasy sports industry. They're really not aware that these bills could and will impact the small companies like ours. So I think when they do find out about it, they're very open to understanding that, you know, clearly if there's going to be legalization of FanDuel and DraftKings, you can't while legalizing them too, you can't basically put out of business the rest of the industry. That doesn't make any sense. So they all seem to be pretty open.
And even beyond our association, there are more than 300 fantasy sports businesses
Out there.
nationwide that, you know, could potentially be impacted to varying degrees.